For those of you who don't know me, I'm Del Rowlands. I'm the Director of Membership for the Association. And delighted this morning for two reasons, really, because there's going to be lots and lots of interesting stuff that Air Commodore Wendy Rothery, who's Head of Accommodation for the Defence Infrastructure Organisation, is going to give us. And secondly, because Wendy and I know each other from years gone by from my time in service. But Wendy, are you there?
I am indeed. Good morning, Del. Delighted
Lovely.
to be joining you and the RAF Association this morning.
Bless you. Are you well?
I'm very well, thank you. Yes, busy.
Good. Yes, I can well imagine. Well, we shall come on to the busy job that you've got in a minute. Might be worthwhile, Wendy, if you're comfortable, just for those that have joined us, just telling us a little bit about yourself, who you are, where you are, what you're up to at the moment.
Okay, so my background is personnel support, like your good self, Del. Admin sec in old money. I joined the RAF in 1991, so I've had 29 years service to date. Had a really varied and interesting career, lots of different jobs, lots of postings, operational deployments. And I'm currently head of accommodation for defence within the Defence Infrastructure Organisation. So I have responsibility for managing and maintaining 50,000 properties in the UK, and another 10,000 overseas. So it's quite a responsibility, but very rewarding job.
Does that role focus on service families accommodation, Wendy?
It does, yes. So it's broader than the RAF. Includes the Navy and the Army as well. So the whole defence community and some MOD civil servants as well. Yeah, so quite broad.
And what you said a few career highlights there. What careers have you typically? What jobs have you done throughout your career typically that have led you to where you are now in this particular role?
Well, when I joined the RAF, a bit like Air Marshal Mayhew in his interview the other day, I started off as an air traffic controller. But partway through training, I realised I had a left-right correction, so was never really going to make a successful career as an air traffic controller. So I parted company with that. And by the time that happened, I'd been in the Air Force just over a year. Decided that I really enjoyed the role and the lifestyle, and applied to be reselected to a different branch, and that's where administration came in. And I've had a very varied career since then. I've done a bit of media operations work. I've worked in an outer office for some senior military officers. I was ADC to Commander British Forces Cyprus in the 90s, which was a great fun job. And also military assistant to Chief Defence People more recently. I've been head of RAF recruiting in the approach to the RAF centenary, which again was a really fun and rewarding job. So yeah, I've had a fair bit of variety, but mainly personnel appointments, looking after our people.
What would you say then? There's a broad gamut there. What would you say were the career highlights?
Firstly, from my early days, it would be the ADC role in Cyprus. I had a superb boss, which is half the battle in those jobs. It was a fascinating time. It gave me a real insight into the political dynamic over in Cyprus with the North-South divide. It was before Cyprus joined the European Union, so it wasn't too developed at that stage. The boss was very busy, getting out and about and seeing the islanders and looking after all the British forces there. So we had about 4,000 people living out in Cyprus, another 10,000 family members. So he had a very responsible job, and my job was to get him to the right place at the right time in the right kit and with the right briefing notes. So yeah, managed to survive that. But that was a really fun job, and I had some opportunities to do some different things, once in a lifetime type opportunities. So I flew with the Red Arrows when they came and did their exercise in Cyprus. They do their flying training over there because the weather's so good, or they did at that stage. So I got to fly in the 10th aircraft, and that was great fun. I also rode on parade with my boss. He was invited to be the reviewing officer for a graduation parade at Sandhurst. So and we were mounted for that. So again, a bit of a first for the RAF, and certainly a first for me.
Had you ridden before that particular parade at Sandhurst?
I did a little bit, but nothing like that. Nothing like parade riding. And of course, part of the challenge was working out what we should wear, because the RAF doesn't typically put officers on horseback. So, but we did it, and it was really successful. So yeah, a bit of a highlight of my career, that. And then the other one that really stands out, apart from my current job, of course, is when I was head of recruiting for the RAF. So I did that from 2016 to 2018, and we the recruiting was at full tilt. So we were, actively bringing in a lot of people, with an emphasis on getting more females in. We're doing quite well. The RAF, so Defence we have about 140,000 people across the 3 services, at 10% females overall, which is not enough. The RAF are recruiting about 20% intake as female, which is good, but again, not enough. And particular focus on getting more females into STEM type trades, the more technical maths, engineering type subjects. So that was a big focus. But in the run up to the RAF centenary in 2018, that job was great fun. You're dealing with youngsters, making their dreams come true and seeing them start their careers, and remembering how it was for you. So when I arrived at Cranwell to take up that appointment, it was 25 years to the day since I joined initial officer training at Cranwell. So it brought back a few memories.
How did that feel, going back as the boss of the recruiting organisation, especially on that anniversary, actually, but 25 years later? Did you ever envisage, having gone through the gates 25 years before, that you would go back to being the one person, with your team obviously, but responsible for recruiting everybody into the Royal Air Force? How did that feel?
At that stage of joining, no. I mean, when I joined initially, it was on a 5-year short service commission. And that seemed like a lifetime in those days. If you told me then that I'd still be in the Air Force 30 years later, I wouldn't have believed it. But I guess the key thing is that I really enjoy the work. I enjoy the variety. I've got a fairly low boredom threshold, so I like change. I like new challenges. I like seeing different parts of the world. So I'm a really good fit, I think, with the organisation. And when I went back into recruiting, reading a lot about what attracts youngsters into an organisation, and about 60 to 70% of the decision is based on whether they feel they'll be a good fit within that organisation. So that's really what the services are looking for, is appealing to the people that they think would be a good fit and would do well in the forces. Not for everybody. It's more of a lifestyle than a job, certainly, or even a career. I think DCOMOPS referred to it as a calling. It's a vocation, a lifestyle choice, and for me, it's been a really good fit and really rewarding. So, no regrets.
Well, clearly no regrets. If you signed for 5 years, and here we are 30 something later, I'm guessing that the decision was an easy one. But you touched on RAF 100 there, which is a fascinating time, very proud time for those of us in the service and the wider RAF family. And you tickled the edges of the youth element, and I'll come back to that in a second. But what did the service see as a result of RAF 100 in recruiting terms? Did it make a big difference?
We were doing relatively well in terms of bringing the numbers in. We still had a couple of areas, so engineering in particular, comms engineers, we were struggling to meet the numbers for those. And then in other niche areas, some of the specialist areas such as chaplains and nurses. But we were only looking for 4 chaplains a year, for example. So you only need one who decides it's not for them, and you haven't met your numbers. But the RAF 100 really just put the organisation into the public eye. I mean, when we saw the hundreds of thousands of people in London down the mall for the fly past on 10th of July was just incredible, and such public support. And you'll see this through all the work that the RAF Association does, as a key part of the RAF family. The public support is incredible. So I think that was the key thing, really. It just put us back into the public eye in a really visible way that perhaps we hadn't seen since we came out of combat in Afghanistan. So the RAF at the moment is heavily committed on operations, but we're just not talking about them as much as perhaps we did when we were in combat in Afghanistan. So I think that was the main thing that it did for us. But it also opened up opportunities through all the RF 100 engagements in London and around the UK, for youngsters to go along and find out a little bit more about what the RAF does, and the different careers opportunities that are available. So 68 we have at the moment, 68 different career choices. And of those 20 apprenticeships. You can tell I've worked in recruiting, can't you? You can join as a regular full-time role, but also part-time for people who don't want to do it as a full-time career, but have a bit of spare time, and can do different trades, different roles, evenings and weekends, that type of thing. So there's something for everybody.
What advice would you give? And I think I looked at the participant list earlier, although I won't do it now because I'm on an iPad and it'll probably fall over. But I think there might have been a cadet, if I read the participant list properly, actually joining us today. You've been the former head of RAF recruiting. You've seen what works and what doesn't work. What advice would you give to somebody, without giving too much away, I'm sure, but what advice would you give to somebody who wanted to join the service today?
Well, if you're already in the cadets, you will have a good idea and understanding of what it's like to be in uniform and the different opportunities that are available through being in the service. So the cadets is a fantastic youth organisation. It's not necessarily gearing people up to join the service, but many of the cadets who are in cadets then go on to join the Air Force, which is fantastic. They do very well because they've got a good understanding of what it entails. Those who don't, for whatever reason, either because they've decided it's not for them, or they don't have the aptitude to do what they would wish to do, go on to other fulfilling careers, and they're great advocates for the RAF. But I saw the interview with David McLaughlin. I think he said just go for it, and I'd say the same. Find out if it's a good fit. I mean, that's key, really. If you enjoy the lifestyle, so find out as much as you can about it. The RAF website is widely available. RAF careers. Just research, have a look, and online there are some aptitude tests that you can go on and do to see whether or not you'd pass selection, and just talk to people. That's really the best thing. Talk to people who are in uniform about what they do. When we were in recruiting, that was one of the key methods of bringing people into the organisation, actually taking them onto a station and showing them the people who are doing those different jobs, talking to them about what they do and some of the benefits. So the subsidised food, accommodation, the travel opportunities, the variety of work, sports, adventurous training, and the opportunities for education as well. So I now have 3 master's degrees, which is probably something else that I thought I'd never do, and all of those I've achieved while I've been in the RAF. So it's given me fantastic opportunities for self-development that I may not have done otherwise.
Thank you. You mentioned 2 things there that perhaps allow us to move on to where you are now. The first one was good fit, and head of accommodation for the Defence Infrastructure Organisation. And I noticed the way that you very kindly said one of the career highlights, of course, was the job that you're in, as it would be every time. What are the biggest challenges that you faced in that role, and perhaps now especially?
Well, firstly, it's a huge privilege being responsible for defence accommodation. So I use the analogy that there's a direct link between providing quality accommodation and support and operational capability. So if service personnel know that their families are being well looked after and well supported, they can get on and focus on the job that we employ them to do, whether that's at home or deployed overseas. So it's absolutely key. It's not because we're a benevolent employer, there is that direct link with underlining and supporting operational capability. Some of the challenges come through government funding, obviously, because as you know, as a public service, we do rely on that funding, and we never have enough money to do everything that we would wish to do. So, and some of the policy and processes that we have in place, are not within my gift to change. So I can only do so much with what I have, but seeing the trends in customer satisfaction, in maintenance support, in housing delivery continue and increase is really, really rewarding. So it's our approach is working. It needs more investment, so that's a key challenge, and explaining that to our people that we are restricted in what we can provide due to the funding that we have available, I suppose, is a key challenge as well. But the benefits, I would say, far outweigh that. Being able to respond in an agile way to some of those accommodation needs. So, for example, with COVID-19 in the last few weeks, we have provided a number of properties for people, service personnel repatriated from overseas, from areas such as Kenya and Nepal, where we had the army carrying out training work. But because the medical facilities over there are not as assured, shall we say, not as guaranteed as they are in the UK, we decided fairly on that we'd bring them all back to the UK. So we had a huge challenge in finding vacant service family accommodation properties for 150 people in under a week, and we turned it round. We had, they were arriving just with a couple of suitcases each as a family, so just their clothing basically and a few personal possessions. So we had to provide everything for those properties, fully furnished, with all the white goods, things like vacuum cleaners, lawn mowers, even hangers for the wardrobes, everything you can think of that you would need if you were just moving into a property and didn't have access to go out and buy things from the shops, because obviously the restrictions that we have in place. And even Wi-Fi, which we know is essential for families to enable the children to carry on studies, to enable family members to work and just stay in touch with family and friends. Wi-Fi is absolutely essential. So we had them all ready to go in less than a week, 150 properties. And we have most of those filled now. So it's a phenomenal achievement. And that's the really rewarding part of the job, when you're able to do things like that to support the community, as you'll see through the work that you do with Rafa.
Absolutely, and you touched on there something that's enjoyable, and I was about to ask you, what is the most, there are a lot of challenges there, but what is the most enjoyable part of the role?
I think for me, it's making a difference, seeing things that aren't working as well as they could be, and then applying a bit of effort, a bit of leadership, getting the team to sort of deliver against your vision. It's not down to me, it's down to the wonderful staff that I have supporting me, but basically getting them working well together, getting them collaborating with our industry partners. So Amy and Mears are two of the organisations that provide sterling support for defence accommodation. and it's enabling people to work together in the most effective way. And it's so satisfying to see those things working well. And then the maintenance response times start to improve, the quality of the maintenance improves, customer satisfaction starts going up, complaints start reducing. Seeing all those levers, and we do measure those things quite closely. So I think that's the most rewarding thing, is just seeing seeing it work, seeing it progress and improve. Hugely satisfying.
Now, you find yourself, and you mentioned the female element into service earlier. I'd like to just touch on that, if I may, please, because you find yourself as a senior officer in the service. What challenges has that brought you?
Well, firstly, as a female joining the Air Force, I mean, I can honestly say it has made absolutely no difference. I happen to be female, but I've had exactly the same opportunities, and I've been, recognised or rewarded in the same way as my male counterparts. So, being female hasn't impacted in that sense. However, when you get to this stage, fairly senior within the RAF, you're in a relatively small pool, but as a female, you're in an even smaller pool. So we have 5 Air Commodores, 3 Air Vice Marshals, and 1 Air Marshal, which is fantastic. The RAF was the first of the UK Armed Forces to have a 3-star. An engineer, Sue Gray, which is amazing and a real achievement. But it is a challenge. So when I worked at PJHQ, I did a media ops role when we were committed to Op Herrick in Afghanistan. And I could often be in a command group meeting and be the only female in the room of 20 or so. And that can be a challenge, but I have to say I had fantastic leadership and fantastic support in that organisation. So again, it didn't really affect me. I've had the same opportunities and the same recognition, just happened to be female. The challenge, I suppose, for the organisation is getting more females, getting more representative of society. So 20% intake is good, but it's not good enough. We are missing out as an organisation on a huge pool of talent if we're only appealing to 20% of females. So we need more, and we need to progress and get females at the top of the organisation so they can act as role models for the youngsters, who can then see that there's a clear career path for them in whatever they choose to do.
You touched on leadership there, and I think you said in PGHQ, with specifics aside, but you mentioned about good leadership in PGHQ. What do you see are the attributes of a good leader in your time in service? What stood out to make good leadership for you?
So firstly, leading by example, so role modelling the behaviour that you would expect to see in members of your team and in others. Being clear about your intent and setting a clear vision and mission, and then empowering your team to get on and deliver. So telling people what you want to achieve, but not to go, not how to go about it. Having a strong moral compass, I think, is really important too. So doing the right thing, which is not necessarily the easy thing. Valuing everybody's unique skills and abilities. So inclusivity is really key to leadership. And then I suppose the ultimate test is when you leave the organisation, the impact that you've been able to have as a leader lasts, sustains. So the things that you've put in place in terms of how the team is working, that continues. I suppose that's the ultimate test of a good leader. But yeah, those are some of the things that I've experienced from good leaders I've worked for.
And again, if I may, touching on experience, I'm aware that you've got some significant family history from a service perspective, both with your grandfather and your great aunt. And we spoke briefly when we last caught up about about your grandfather and his role as a navigator during the Second World War. And I know that the people who are watching and listening will be intrigued with what it was that you told me that he went through. Would you be happy to tell us about your grandfather?
Yes, of course, yeah. And I think looking back, that probably had quite an influence on me. So my grandfather was Flight Lieutenant William Fisher Martin, DFC, and he completed 32 operational missions with 57 Squadron as part of Bomber Command during the Second World War in 1944. He was with 57 Squadron. He was a navigator on the Lancaster, and a very skilled and experienced navigator, particularly by the time that one particular mission where they'd encountered heavy flak on return from their target. So they'd carried out their bombing mission, and then they came under attack, leaving the continent, coming back into the UK. And the fuel tanks were holed, so they basically steadily ran out of fuel and lost 3 engines, so they're down to 1 engine. And the captain decided to ditch in the North Sea, so they brought a Lancaster down in gale force winds, as it happened. Incredible story. They all got out, so the entire crew escaped safely. They're a bit battered and bruised, but they got out into the life raft and watched as their aircraft sank to the depths, which was, quite a sad as well as quite shocking moment for them, because that aircraft had carried them safely on up to that point. I think 26 operational missions. So great sadness. And they spent 11 hours in the life raft before they were spotted by chance by an air sea rescue aircraft, who was actually looking for survivors from the night before, operations the night before. So it was by chance that they were spotted, and then help was on its way, and they were picked up by a merchant navy vessel. My grandfather and the skipper were taken off to hospital because they were quite badly cut, had head injuries. And the rest of the crew were sent home, and they rejoined and given a bit of leave after that incident, as you'd expect. A few days off, and then they were back on ops again a couple of weeks later. So phenomenal story. They all lived to tell the tale. And when 57 Squadron started an association, a reunion in 1979, they wrote the story of their operational tour and what had happened that night, and had it published, and all met up again in 1979 at East Kirkby, and I went along with my parents, so I was there. I remember that very clearly. Clearly a very young child at that time, and so sadly my grandfather died when I was 10, so didn't get to see me join the RAF, but as I said, I think that had quite an influence on me. So yeah, that generation was a breed apart, I think, and in the run up to VE Day 75th, we're seeing that with some of the veterans who are still with us happily, and I've had a number of honorary granddads being involved with 57 Squadron over the years, people who were there at East Kirkby when my grandfather served, at the same time. So and I'm now I've taken on the role of historian for the 57 and 630 Squadrons Association, so I can probably give Chris Goss a bit of a run for his money in terms of his research.
I was just about to say, actually, if there was ever going to be a challenge to somebody, it would be Chris Goss, who, as you mentioned, and many people watching may well be aware, one of our trustees, resident historian, former wing commander, and I'm sure that if he doesn't know already, he'll be doing lots of research on Ava Abel. I'm sure he won't find out as much as you have by the sound of it. You mentioned VE Day there, and of course the association is doing a fair number of things, so look at the website, folks, please, for VE Day celebrations. What is there anything that you'll be doing in particular on VE Day, Wendy, if I can ask?
So I've done a recording for RAF Witten. So I've read a prayer as part of the RAF Witten service that'll be going out. I think it's going out tomorrow, and I'll be keeping in touch with colleagues from 57 Squadron Association. On that, I've been asked to pass on a message to the RAF Association from the son of one of our veterans, Flight Lieutenant Steve Stevens, who was a captain with 57 Squadron. He was also DFC and highly decorated during the Second World War. Very sadly, he passed away a couple of weeks ago. But in the last 3 years of his life, the association, through its befriending service, which I think is wonderful, by the way, provides fantastic companionship and support for our veterans. So in the last 3 years after Steve's wife had died, a chap called Jason Oakes came to spend time with him, initially at home, subsequently in hospital when he fell ill, and then latterly when he was in a nursing home close to Norfolk. So Jason Oakes provided a wonderful companionship for Steve, and just sort of maintained that link that he had, you know, with the RAF. And Steve's son Adrian asked me to pass on that Dad always enjoyed seeing him. He really does deserve a mention in dispatches, a true friend. So thank you, Jason.
Wendy, thank you, and we'll make sure that Jason gets sight of this. I mean, befriending from an association perspective has always been such an important part of what we do, but never more so than at the moment, of course, because befriending is a face-to-face engagement, and unfortunately that's just simply not possible. So our OpConnect work is actually focusing in one area on telephone befriending, and that's and that will remain important to us as the weeks go ahead. Now we mentioned briefly as well your provenance from a family perspective. We've got great aunt Mary Gibson Martin that I am intrigued about, and I'm sure other people will be as well, although perhaps a few Official Secrets Act warnings for this one, but perhaps you can tell us about your great aunt.
Yes, of course. Well, she was my grandfather's sister, so a family of 3 children, and they all served in the Second World War. So the youngest son, Andrew, went off to join the army. I mean, they were all conscripted. They didn't actively choose, clearly. It was wartime. My grandfather joined the RAF, and my great aunt, so his sister, Mary, joined the Women's Royal Army Corps. So she was a wireless operator. And after training, which was carried out on the Isle of Man, she was posted to what was then a secret listening station. It was in Harrogate. We're beyond that part now that we can actually talk about it, but that's where she spent her wartime years. And she was intercepting enemy messages in Morse code, and those were then being dispatched down to Bletchley Park to support the work on the Enigma and the code-breaking work that was taking part at Bletchley Park. So she didn't know that then, and none of them did, and they were also told that they couldn't talk about the work that they did. So she didn't really talk about it much, except she would focus on the camaraderie that she'd had during the Second World War. Great times, great friendships that had formed. And in, I think it was 2000, she met up with all the girls that she'd worked with at the time. They were all women, and they met up 60 years on in 2000. And by that time they were talking a bit more openly about what they had been doing. And she lived to 94. My grandfather sadly died in his 60s, but she lived to 94. So again, a real sort of inspiration for me joining the military, and very proud to have that family history in the forces and to be following in their footsteps. She was very proud of me being in the Air Force, and I'm incredibly proud of what she achieved.
Did she have any difficulty, given that she was in the Women's Royal Army Corps? And fascinating work, another challenge for Chris Goss there, I think, Wendy, as well. But did she have any difficulty with the fact that you went into the light blue, given that she was in the Royal Army Corps?
No, I don't think so. She was incredibly proud of her brother Bill, my grandfather, and his wartime service in the RAF. So yeah, I think she was just very proud that she used to boast about the fact that she had a brigadier in the family through her younger brother. That was that side of the family, and a wing commander, which I was at the time. So brigadier and the wing commander. She could hardly believe that, to have two senior officers in her family. Very proud of that.
I can see where your motivation for service will have come from with both your granddad and your great aunt. Talking of motivation, then, we find ourselves in interesting times at the moment. But are you motivated to do anything that you haven't done before as a result of a degree of social isolation? Any new hobbies?
Well, that's an interesting one. So I have been quite busy, just in a very different way to normally. So I'm working from home, but still fairly long hours. But I have been really enjoying getting out and about. We live in Berkshire. We have some local lakes, old gravel pits actually, local lakes now. So cycling around those in the evening time and seeing the wildlife. The geese and the ducklings, and it's just wonderful to see wildlife in its natural habitat. We have a country park very close to us, within a 10-minute walk, and you can spot deer and herons and some wonderful wildlife. So I've been really enjoying that. I've rediscovered a passion for cooking and baking, so lots of homemade goodies. It's nice to have the time to do that.
Is it banana bread? I understand banana bread's a bit of a popular one at the moment.
Oh, is it? I haven't tried that.
Apparently, every time I look on any digital platform, any social media, somebody I know is making banana bread.
Thanks, Dale. I'll give that a go. But no, lots of different homemade soups and some goodies, scones and fudge and that type of thing. Really enjoying that. And we've also had a virtual dinner party, so using Zoom for in a social way as well, so which was fantastic. A couple who live locally, who we would have normally seen for dinner, so we just zoomed in, and the next thing we knew, it was midnight, and we'd had a thoroughly good evening. So yeah.
And no drive home needed.
Exactly. Yes.
Perfect. Now
we're still dressed up though. It was all part of the occasion.
quite right too. Now you mentioned a few things on the sort of social side. They're getting out and about, but what and it may well be what you just described, but what is the ideal Sunday for you and Di?
Okay, the ideal Sunday. That's an interesting one. Well, at the moment, given that we can't get to the Caribbean, we do enjoy our travelling and our holidays in the Caribbean. So,
would you normally go to the Caribbean on a Sunday? Is that just a day trip?
We normally have a couple of weeks in the Caribbean at some point in the year, so and hopefully we'll manage to get there later this year as well, once we all recover from this current situation. But no, I'm joking, of course. My ideal Sunday is spending time with family and friends, a long walk or cycle ride in the country, and probably dinner and a show in the evening. As I said, I've got a fairly low boredom threshold, so I keep pretty active. I like to pack lots into my free time, so it wouldn't necessarily be a relaxing day. It'd be quite an active day.
Well, Wendy, thanks ever so much for joining us. As is traditional on these Zoom coffees, I'd ask you all to raise your mugs, please. And Wendy, I know you've got your RAF Association mug there as well, and likewise too. Good health, best to you. Thank you very much for joining us, and it's been an absolute pleasure. So cheers to you.
And thank you, Dal, again, to the RAF Association for all the fantastic work that they do, the befriending initiative, all the other work, both for our serving personnel and our veterans, particularly with the Day 75th coming up. It's hugely appreciated. You're a key part of the RAF family. We really appreciate all the good work that you do. So keep it up.
That's really kind of you, Wendy. Thank you. And as you say, we're all part of the same family. Wendy, I'm sure you're going to be too busy for this, and forgive me for looking away for a second, but everybody, please do join us this afternoon, 2 o'clock. We've got Ian from the RAF Museum. He's going to be giving us a presentation, Safeguarding the Last Battle of Britain Bomber. So maybe that one may well be worth tuning into, Wendy. And then tomorrow at 11, a conversation with certainly an old boss of mine, but an old pal now, ABM Gary Waterfalls. So that'll be 11 o'clock tomorrow morning. But until then, thank you very much for joining us. And most importantly, Wendy, thank you. Lovely to see you. Look after yourself, and we'll see you for a non-virtual dinner party at some stage, I'm sure.
My pleasure. Thanks, Del. Stay safe,
Take
everybody.
good care of yourself. All the best. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.